Well, this is post-lunch, episode 13, and I'm its host, Alexander Prokhorov. This episode is going to be in English, which is quite a change. And another big thing is my guest is sitting next to me. His name Alex Johansson. He's an indie developer from Cambridge, England. Alex, can you just introduce yourself briefly and tell us how did you become a game developer and why?
Okay, so my name is Alex Johansson. I'm a games developer who's based in Cambridge, and hence how we can have this conversation. I've been developing games for about 6 or 7 years now, but commercially only making them for maybe 2 or 3. I got into games by going to a US summer camp and throwing myself in at the deep end, teaching children how to code. Having no knowledge at the time of how to build games myself. And from like 3 or 4 years of doing that, built up enough knowledge to build my own games and have released 3 or 4 apps since that time. Sorry, three apps. 3 apps.
Why games? Why did you decide to make games in the first place?
So I've had an interest in games since very young, but in terms of actually making games, I did a design course at uni, and as part of that, there was never really that much building games in that. And
what was it called?
So it was just a design course. Do you mean the university?
Yeah, I mean the course, the one like was it more like art-based or code-based? Like what is the?
So it was just a computer games design course, and there was games theory as part of it, but for what I was doing, it never got to actually tangibly making games. It was always relying on programmers, and after I think it was the second team project folded, in second year that we failed to make anything. I was like, okay, I'm sick of this. I'm just going to learn how to do this myself. And then from there, I just basically learned how to. Got like a really basic idea of how to program with like visual logic, kind of clicking bits of code together, and then that led to getting the job in the US.
Okay, so you make all your games in Stencyl, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Why Stencyl and not like I've had a previous guest who like pretty much in the same boat as you are, like they are more actually designers or artists, and they all solo developers. So they use Construct, for example, which is, as far as I know, it's not Stencyl, but I mean it's more or less the same thing. Why Stencyl?
So basically, so there was a conference I went to. You probably know about EGX. I went to that a long time ago. I think it was like 2011 or whatever. Just from going down there and being like, okay, I'm going to go meet the industry. This is going to be good. Like, actually went and bought a suit for the occasion because
really?
It was a cheap suit, but I was like,
but still,
I was prepped. Like, I had an impression of what I was going to get, and from going there was basically no industry reps there. It was literally all just either PR reps or like random assistants, staff from the event.
Yeah.
So I was really disappointed. But the one area that actually had people in was the Left Field collection, which is this collection of small. It's a space that they give to independent developers, and as part of that, I got talking to these small developers, and one of them just suggested 3 or 4 different engines to look into. I think one was called Flashpunk, which I think has evolved into something else now. And then there was 2 others, and one of those was Stencyl. Just from there, I picked it up, and kind of over the course of 6 or 7 months, just kind of learned how to Frankenstein kind of various games together. And just in terms of Stencyl itself, I really like it as a tool just because you kind of have like minimal compiler issues, compiler errors, because you're just throwing blocks together. So it's really quick to kind of prototype and iterate in. as long as you work within the constraints of what it can do, it's like a really good tool for kind of building stuff.
What the constraints are?
So
like what can you do with Stencyl?
So it's very good for mobile games in terms of being able to kind of like export stuff nice and quickly. Just being able to. It has a really Game Maker seems to have finally caught up with it, but like for the longest time, like Stencyl has had like a really really good scene editor. So like really good for kind of like blocking out basic kind of arcadey environments. The animations tools were great. Once again, the visual interface for programming was really nice. And Game Maker Studio 2 has... I'm still not 100% on board with it, but it has caught up with like what they've got. In that element, the tools are very approachable, and that was reflected in the kids that worked with in the US, who I had 7-year-olds building games in like 3 weeks.
Oh, that's impressive.
That's good,
I've got some friends who've been developing their games for 7 years, still not released. Have you ever thought of, changing the engine, like to even game maker?
Yeah, so I've been in, I think I was talking to someone about this earlier this week, but it's kind of like, it's like choosing when to jump. Because it's like, this tool, you kind of all the ins and outs. You can build a game in like a short period of time. Like the game I'm working on at the moment, Baboom, sorry, not Baboom, Shump. I need to but like,
change the name.
That's a 6-month cycle, which is pretty good. Like in terms of like getting a full commercial release turned around. If I go to Game Maker now, I've got to relearn everything, and I've got the licenses and everything for it. I've got mobile licenses for it, but I need to make sure that there is a game in place to cover that burn time where I'm not going to be releasing tiles. So that's the kind of the question. Is it's like how many more games could I squeeze in Stencyl before I shift over to Game Maker? Or
potentially, do you see like in the future?
Absolutely. I do. For educational purposes, I definitely want to keep using Stencyl to kind of teach people and tutor people with. But in terms of kind of moving forwards, Game Maker is the tool that I want to move to. I've got, as I said, I've bought all the licenses for it. So
okay.
Yeah, but it's just choosing when to make that jump. That it's like I could theoretically release a couple more games at like full capability in Stencyl, or I could make the jump and be in a better position using Game Maker. So it's just trying to figure out when is the right time for that.
So, your first game. When we first met, you were like, as far as I know, you hadn't released any games before that. It was 2 years ago.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that sounds about right.
So your first game, which at least I saw, was Narcissus.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Can you tell me about Narcissus, how it came about, and you told me before it took like 5 years to make, but I know there were breaks.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Because our podcast is about like mistakes, pitfalls, and all that stuff. Can you jump in the rabbit hole and see, like, tell us what were the biggest mistakes you made making Narcissus?
So I'll do a quick summary of like kind of how the project came about, and then kind of go into the various mistakes.
That's good.
So the initial inspiration of it came from watching my brother jump across stepping stones on like a really still day, jumping across the river where I lived. And I could see his reflection doing the same jumps in the river. So I was like, that'd make a cool mechanic. The game, if your audience don't know, it's basically you control two characters independent to one another, jumping along various platforms. You've got to keep them both alive. It was a simple enough mechanic. It was the first game that I chose to make in Stencyl, so it was a good focus for learning the tool. In terms of development, it was, I think, it was about 5 years on and off. I'm glad that I stuck with it because it was like it was a lot of time invested. but as part of that, as you explained, that there was like a lot of reasons why it took as long as it did to kind of get to that point. In terms of mistakes, so one which was eventually nipped in the bud was, and this is like a kind of a silly initial one, is color choice. So I am if one of the issues of working on your own, I have really poor color choice, like, in terms of like it's getting better, but like for a number of years, like I've just been dreadful with like figuring out how to color games.
And to make it clear to our audience, you are not an artist.
No.
Well, how do you position yourself?
So it's once again, it's like a jack of all trades situation, but like for a number of years, I did literally all I did was draw. Like for 10 years, I carried around a note. I think from like age of 12, it's actually a bit longer now, but from the age of like 12, 13, I've carried around a notebook with me, and so I can draw. I have the capability to draw, but that's not like my specialism. As I said, I can draw. I just can't colour. I just
Fair enough.
So yeah, like so for Narcissus in particular, the colour design for the game was dreadful initially. So it was grey for the blocks, white and black for the characters, which is fine, but grey for the actual blocks of the level, and then this like kind of acid purple for the background, which was just horrible to look at. And eventually, after 2 or 3 years of showcasing it at various festivals and stuff, just one developer came up to me and just said, "This is." Am I good to use expletives?
Yeah, go ahead.
He just said it was just fucking disgusting. Like literally, like this is to my face. It's like the background looks fucking disgusting. And that was enough of a shake-up for me to review that. So that definitely helped, because I know when I initially put it to Steam Greenlight, when that still existed, I got a lot of pushback on that front. So that was one of the issues. Like aesthetically, it looked dreadful to begin with. And then let me think on kind of other fronts of mistakes made. Let me think. So the choice to go to Steam early on rather than focusing on iOS was probably a big one. But at the time, I was quite constrained by like what I had available in terms of tech, because obviously you'll know for iOS you need to have a Mac to be able to export. And yeah, I kind of chose to look at Steam Greenlight, and it was just blatantly not the audience for it. Just because it was clear that it was a mobile game. But
so for you, it was like a wake-up call. Like you need to buy a Mac.
Well, to be honest, I stuck with it, and this is the big thing: is I stuck for it for a long period of time. That decision, like we're talking, I tried pushing it for like a year and a half. I mean, this was on and off with work at the uni I was working with at the time. But yeah, like it was a long time. I tried to basically push down on it, and it was, I won't say the name of the developer, but a developer at the time that I really looked up to basically said, like, don't release your game until you have it on Steam. And I, believed them by that.
What year was it?
I think
roughly
2014 maybe, but this was when I won exhibiting space at Left Field Collection. So kind of came full circle that getting to exhibit in the place that I'd essentially come into the industry, which was really nice. And a developer came up to me and was like, "Yeah, this is an amazing game." And obviously, I was already like starstruck at that point, but they were like, "Don't release it until you've got it on Steam." And the problem is, and this is a big thing I'd suggest for your listeners to consider, is like, it's really, really dangerous to take someone's advice purely in a vacuum. I'm trying to think of a way to put it, but basically, like, even if there's someone who you look up to, and I don't blame this individual for making this decision. If anything, it might have just been like an off-the-cuff
No, it's very good advice.
Yeah.
I know where it's heading, but can you?
And yeah, it's just like making the mistake of even if someone has like a variety of experience in industry, they don't necessarily know the nuances of your project. Everything that they've worked on before that, you don't know all the variables of like how they got in this position. Like, I used to give lots of like big advice to like students and graduates and stuff like that, but eventually I reached a point where I realized I needed to acknowledge that there's been a lot of kind of steps up that I've been given in terms of making games. That like for example, after I graduated uni, my family let me stay with them for a year, rent free, which not necessarily every developer is going to have access to. So I, at the time, didn't factor in like that this suggestion by this developer was kind of even though they were like really prestigious, it was insane to use their suggestion as like an absolute target without considering talking to other people, like someone who worked in mobile who was like, hey, maybe you should release it on mobile first. So I went down this rabbit hole of like trying to get it on Steam, like shoehorning this game which was made for mobile onto Steam for ages, and it got through Greenlight, but it's still sitting waiting to be shipped. And I am genuinely...
You still have the I don't know what it's called, but you can still release it on Steam. I mean, technically.
I must assume so.
Yeah, as far as I know, people who went and wasn't in lead, they can release their games. I mean,
it makes sense because it paid the money. Oh, my night.
It's still a thing. I mean,
yeah, but that's a big one. I would say is just like, if you're making a big decision, don't base it on the feedback of one person. Always ask for other advice.
Okay. While we're on the advice thing, there is a question from the audience. Actually, it's in English. So, what advice would you give to the young developers 16, 18 who are just beginning their way into game dev? How to overcome the desire to make a dream game, AAA plus the guy say sorry for Google Translate, but I think
that's
it was
that's pretty clear.
Perfect
on
English.
the
I mean,
nose,
my English isn't that good.
That's fine.
Maybe. I mean, you've just said that. Again, don't listen. Don't take anyone's advice.
Everything. Have a good
blindly.
Good pot of salt. Take everything with a pinch of salt.
But for an aspiring game developer in their teens, what would you recommend? I don't know where to begin. So.
The big one that definitely helps is finding local communities. So if you can find, either communities of people that you can kind of see the path forward, so you can kind of see other developers and see how they've kind of proceeded forwards, particularly locally, so you can see, based on where you are, kind of the workflow of where to go forwards. If you can find someone who's willing to give you advice and kind of tutor you, for me, like another amazing opportunity that I got was there was a lecturer in Australia. He gave me just amazing advice for like, and they ran a website called I think it's called Indie Bits. And they just gave me all of this industry information, and just kind of having that tutor was an amazing opportunity. But in terms of actually making stuff and getting started, like there's never been more tools and more information online for kind of producing stuff. If depending on what your expertise is, I would still, even if you're an artist, I would still try and get some basic programming knowledge. Whether that's using something like Stencyl or a visual scripting tool, don't feel like there is somewhat of a stigma I've found to people kind of like scoffing at visual scripting, but like at the end of the day, if it gets a game made, that's all that matters. Just focus on making kind of small stuff to begin with. I mean, for me, that's kind of a lie, because it took me it was a small game in terms of mechanics, but I built like 50 levels of content, so that would, once again, it took like 5 years to finish, but even a small game like that was such a long process to make. Other than that, just try and release stuff. Just because once you get that workflow in place, you'll be set. And I should emphasize as well, if I don't know how old you are, in terms of listening. I assume 16 to 18, you're within that range. But you're already ahead of me if you're thinking about this stuff. I didn't start programming until I was maybe 20. So if you're at the lower end of that 16, you're already 4 years ahead of me if you're thinking about this stuff. Just start making games now, and then by the time that you're my age, you'll be making dinosaurs of both of us.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a two-part question. How to overcome the desire to make a dream game? Let me rephrase the question and say, for example, you've got an idea for a big game, big complex game. I'm sure you have.
Yeah, I've got a couple.
How do you, make yourself to put it aside and work on smaller games and get that experience, which eventually will help you to, make that big dream?
So the good thing that going back to the constraints of Stencyl, there is one dream game that I think it was basically like Halo meets. It was basically Dead Space before Dead Space came out. I can claim that, but
okay.
But yeah, there was this game that I worked on for years, in terms of drawing up sketches and kind of terrifying my parents and destroying these horrific alien images and things like that. But this project I worked on for 6 years or something like that, kind of drawing up concepts for, and it was the dream game. Not anymore particularly, but at the time, when I would have been starting to make games, it was definitely in the back of my head. But the tool that I was using to make the game with, or to make games with, wasn't up to the... There was no way that I was going to make the game that I wanted to make, this dream game, in the tool that I had available.
Yeah.
So in a way, the constraints of the tool that I'd chosen stopped me from making these kind of insanely huge projects.
And eventually, I think, helped you to, overcome that thing and become a developer, because if you finish something, it's already a big deal.
Yes.
It's better than having that big overblown project which you probably will be making for 7, 8, 10 years.
Yeah.
And you most likely will never release it. Okay, let's continue with Narcissus. I think, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but Narcissus was featured on Apple, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I know the whole thing has changed with Apple, how it features the new games and all that stuff, but back in the days, what was the process of getting a feature?
So at the time, it was basically there was this thing called the roadmap. So it was the Apple roadmap. So they basically had an Excel spreadsheet. They've standardized it now. When you submit your app, they basically have a database or whatever that has all the various information, your release date. You basically give them 6 to 8 weeks for launch, and then you kind of send that information off to them. It does help if you can get a contact, at Apple. I managed to get the email of someone just to kind of check with them and kind of liaise, and but from what I understand now, it's all been automated. Whenever I've spoken to him since then, he's kind of directs you to the
use the form.
Yeah, exactly. So it's I think in that regard, it is a lot more once again, you've got that 6 to 8 weeks for them to look over the projects and kind of see if it's with.
So if you will, let's just make it clear. If you want to release a game on iOS and you want your game to get a feature, you better to give yourself like at least a couple of months.
Yes, giving them a notification ahead of time.
Yeah. Okay. Was it helpful? I mean, you're an indie developer. I'm kind of going ahead myself, but getting featured on a mobile platform, is it like something crucial? Like, is it let's say a deal breaker?
It's make or break. Yeah, absolutely. When you see the drop-offs when you finish the feature and just kind of see how kind of low it really gets in terms of numbers after you get featured. It definitely makes a huge difference. Even more so than like whatever. I'd argue at this point that press is kind of like for all the press that I got for Narcissus, I even got a feature on Rooster Teeth, where the two, I think Gavin and Michael, I think it was called, the two kind of hosts of one of the sectors of it. They produced a playthrough of it, even with all of those kind of like opportunities and kind of reviews. The platform is really like king in terms of like if you get a feature, it makes a huge difference. The good thing is with iOS though, I assume it's the same for Android. I haven't dabbled too much into Android yet, but rather than it just being like one homogeneous store, you have individual like national stores. So you have like the Chinese App Store, the US App Store, the Russian App Store, like each of them have their own feature lists. So actually, even if you don't get a feature in Europe, you might get a feature in America, you might get a feature in Japan.
Or China, or whatever.
Yeah, there are kingmakers. So, Japan, Japan sort of, America, yes, China, yes. Europe, kind of. But yeah, like, as long as you get either China or the US, you're kind of making a decent chunk of change.
Can you get a refeature? Like if you Oh, so it's completely possible if your game does well, you get another round.
So like for a while, so I think for like the first time in like 10 years, Apple shook up their format for their kind of app store, and made the kind of the game of the day function, and then you had your games page just separate to that, and there was a lot of kind of concern that by having it on the second page it was going to kill everyone's revenue, but actually what you find is that I can't speak too long term because I know that there are developers there's some developers who I work with in Stencyl who are like talking about the good old days where it's like 200k for an app, which is like, oh my god. Why wasn't I making games for like in like
why didn't I release it earlier?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, like I've had refeatures. For Corporate Salmon, latest game that got I think I remember it got a feature recently. I think it was maybe China. It basically it's been getting refeatures as recently as last month. This is like 8 months after launch. So like it's still getting spikes of revenue and money coming in. So it's.
I've just got a question. Who decides in which market you get a feature? Like, is it just by Apple? Like, for example, you are submitting your new game and say, I want a feature, and how they decide in which market your game will be released. Is it like?
I've not got a clue. I know from the offset you define what audiences, what countries you want your game to be featured in.
So you can say.
Sorry, I want to say featured. What countries you want your game to be distributed in. Then they basically decide from there.
So it's up to Apple.
It's up to Apple. Sorry, I misphrased that. But yeah, you basically define where you want it to be distributed, and then they make a decision on features. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what their kind of behind the scenes workings are.
Okay, you're using ads revenue as a main monetization.
Yep.
Can you say why? And I mean, I've seen your presentation and I know what, but my audience doesn't know.
Yeah, that's fine.
Why do you think, like in 2018, ad revenue monetization is, let's say, superior to other ways of monetizing an indie game?
So, I don't know whether it's superior because once again I've not had the alternate experience.
Okay.
In my experience, it's been a much better model. I remember the way that I kind of got in touch with the other developers who were using Stencyl, who actually knew what they were doing at the time. I was just kind of I wouldn't have been able to ship Narcissus if it wasn't for them. But I met up with some developers who use Stencyl in Stockholm, and they basically were like, do not release Narcissus as a premium game. That will be a huge mistake. You will make no money. In terms of the reasons why you release, and they gave me a bunch of case studies for like why their games comparatively, but the reasons I found that you release on with ads, and it does depend on the game. It is by case basis, but when you get the feature, you have a week of feature time. If you're releasing on premium, the revenue drops right down when that feature ends because you're no longer getting that exposure. With ads, that revenue continues on more of a kind of slope downwards because you're still getting your customers playing the game, and therefore you've got a longer feature time basically. And then on top of that, kind of in terms of exposure, you get a lot more downloads of the game because it's free. As I mentioned in the presentation, I've officially hit 1 million downloads at this point, or like 1,008,000 or whatever. But I probably wouldn't have got that number of downloads in premium, and it does haunt me thinking about like if I just made it premium with that amount of downloads, I'd have been a millionaire.
Just imagine.
yeah, but like obviously that's nonsense. I've seen stats of people who've done premium games, and it's still like a commendable number. You're talking.
Can you say the numbers like for the listeners, because
for my games or for
in general, like from the your sources, like what a premium game gets in general, an average.
I'm trying to remember
without giving away any specific numbers.
No, I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head. I think this one had about 4,000, 5,000 downloads, which doesn't sound like much, but when they're paying, this was a single developer, and they were paying I think it was $4 an app. So you're talking 20
grand,
which
is 30%.
Yeah, exactly. Apple. So you're talking 16K, which depend once again, and this is the crux, and this is why, whilst Narcissus did well, I still kind of in terms of commercial, it was a bit of a disaster. But as long as your development cycle's short enough, then it's
viable.
Yeah, it's a viable amount for a single developer. But for Narcissus, another mistake that I made with the game was, and this was more kind of exhaustion and stamina, kind of like stamina with the project. I didn't monetize it correctly. So I didn't shop around for ad providers, for example. So I just took the first kind of ad provider I could get, which was AdMob. It was the easiest one to integrate. And it did give me a bunch of money, and because I was exclusively with them, I got a better rate. But I probably could have got an extra maybe 3 or 4 grand or whatever from like going with a different.
Can you elaborate a bit more on the like ad providers? Because for me, it's like completely gray area. I've never done anything like that. And for people who never worked in mobile, I think for them it's like a black box and just.
So the way that it works is, and it's the same as like what happens with YouTube. So you get it's what's known as ECPM. So it's electronic clicks per millennia. I think it's something along those lines. But it's basically it's basically like per million interaction. Sorry, per 1,000 clicks, not millennia. Millennia's 1,000. Yeah. Per 1,000 clicks of an advertisement, you get X amount of money. Mm-hmm. And that usually varies between, let's say, $5 up to $20.
Wow.
So that could be, if you get, let's say, 30,000, I'm just thinking of an example off the top of my head. But like, if you get, with Narcissus, for example, I think it was 300,000 downloads. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if you get a certain number of interactions with advertisements in that, even if you get two ads viewed per customer and interactions, then that's obviously
So it's not even a click; it's just interaction whether like a customer viewed that or.
Once again, it's clicks. So I think basically they alter that value based on how much interaction you have. So for example, China is very, very good for ECPMs. So they have a high engagement with advertisements, so they click on it a lot more. So if you get a feature in China, you're looking at $20 per 1,000 ads clicked. So if you get, I don't know, I'm trying to give an example off the top of my head that makes it sound good. If you get like a million impressions, then obviously that's much better than like the US, where you might get from like 5 to 10 if that. I'm trying to put it in a way that's quantifiable to people that haven't experienced it before.
Don't worry. I think that'll make the math. And it's fine. It just for me, it's coming from PC market. It's completely different thing. I've never even thought about the way it works. So
But it's the big one is regarding the mistake that I made. The way it works is that certain ad providers can give you better rates. So they could set like a minimum ECPM. So rather than it dropping to like
bottom.
It's like with Google, for example, it's kind of bad because like sometimes it drops to like 50 pence or something per 1,000, which is obviously dreadful. So like you can kind of negotiate decent rates, and then you can also do a thing called ad mediation, which is where you have several ad providers who kind of like filter it down. So you give the best ads to a really good ad provider, and then you kind of feed it down to the next ad provider, and then the next ad provider. From that, you just make your revenue from that. And once again, because I think with mobile, there's like a different culture of like how people deal with ads. I think for us as kind of like people who play games in a more traditional format, it's very kind of jarring, to be taken out. But I think for particularly when I see kids playing it, like they don't care. It's just indifferent. It's just push the X, carry on with play. It's I just think it's a completely different audience, and to try and cling to kind of the old traditions, like it's such a huge risk.
I think it must like for us old gamers, already old. It's something like that, like interfere with your experience, with your gaming experience, and we can't accept like having ads in our games, even if they're free. Whereas I think I went to Apple Store the other day, and I saw like 5-year-olds playing like relentlessly on a show phones, and they were so engaged, and I think again, that's just my opinion. I think mobile market probably is the future of gaming. I'm not saying like the I don't know, PC gaming or console gaming will die in the nearest future, but I think the kids and how they perceive gaming in general and games, I think it's changing and it will continue changing. And I think if we want to play on this market, we need to adjust and kind of.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I assume as like phones get more expensive than computers. Like I assume we're moving in that direction. But like, yeah, I think it is kind of like an old dinosaurs thing where like unless we adapt, like and accept that
And I mean, it's not a bad thing. I mean, like many game indie developers, they trying to stay away from like in-app purchases or ad revenue based.
And I think it is genuinely understandable. I understand why people stay away from it because there has been so many like developers that have behaved terribly. But I do genuinely think that there is like a stigma. Particularly in like the indie community about releasing your game with ads in, and yeah, like that it's somehow lesser than even though you're releasing it to a specific market, like with as I mentioned in the talk, people don't think twice about releasing their game and then doing a sale on Steam. That's just the audience and that's the market. It's become that point where selling your game for a fraction of the price of what you perceive it to be worth is the norm now. It's the same with mobile, that you have to adjust your monetization to the platform in question.
Okay, we've been talking for 42 minutes already. And you still got another game in your pocket. Let's talk about it. About this one. It's called Corporate Salmon.
Yep.
And how did this one come around?
So this one was I can't remember the actual specific origin. The earliest memory I have of it was running a workshop at I think I had a couple of hours spare. I was in New York at the time and I had a couple of hours spare before I ran a workshop. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'd built I build controllers, like kind of weird interfaces for games and kind of weird contraptions for controlling games. And I basically made this like floppy kind of like fish controller where you like just slapped the controller like up and down to kind of make a fish jump up, kind of create the motion of a fish jumping, and kind of having exploring New York and kind of like Wall Street and all that stuff. I was like, like let's build a game with like a fish climbing an escalator. And yeah, this kind of like really rough prototype came from it. And then as with a lot of my projects, I kind of just left it on the shelf for like 6 or 7 months. And then after I released Narcissus, I was like, actually no, not 6 or 7 months, it was ages, but basically like, after I released Narcissus, I was like, what do I want to release next? And I was like, this is a reasonably scoped game. I can get this done in like 3 or 4 months. And then it took 6, but I'm still happy with like how long it took. That's
cool. 6 months is pretty fast for a game, especially. I mean, you make everything by yourself, so it's a big effort. Do you? Because we already spoken about the like monetization thing, and it's your second game. Do you try to design your games around the monetization?
So,
like, not monetization, but that specific.
I totally understand what you mean. So with Narcissus, and this is kind of like under the level of mistakes. So, like, even though I did monetize it as an ad-based game, I still was resisting at the time making it mobile focused. Mm-hmm. It was still trying to make it into this like bespoke indie game,
which was a mistake.
I think so. There's several ways that manifested. So, for example, and I enjoyed the experience of doing this, but I basically localized it into like 15 languages.
But you don't have many like
a lot of text.
No, but it was still a
faff
faff to do. But I think it's also translated to Russian, so like call me out if I've spelled anything wrong with that. But yeah, like rather than just having icons that like most mobile games have, I opted for like text, and then once again localized into 15 languages.
You get another mistake.
Yeah,
you can count this.
I mean, when I come back to releasing it on Steam, which I do plan to do later this year, hopefully, that will be useful to have had that available. But for mobile, that wasn't the right format. Like I should have had it in like a mobile format. And with Corporate Salmon, and with my latest title Shump, I've kind of kept it to the format of, how mobile is presented. And yeah, like there's like certain things that you just don't do on mobile. So one thing that I did do, which was a huge mistake, which I rectified with Corporate Salmon. So with Narcissus, I put the remove ad function in the settings menu on the main menu, so you couldn't access it in game except if you went back to the main menu, and then
which is like miles away from.
So it was really inaccessible, and that, even though for me I was like, I want to keep this experience pure and just have like removing the ads as this little side thing. What that actually did was it meant the people that wanted to remove ads couldn't find how to do it.
You buried it so deep.
Yeah, and in a way to kind of stop my kind of art creation being compromised, I actually did the opposite. People who wanted to remove ads couldn't figure out how to do it. So it meant that there was like, I think it got like 100 in-app purchases, like, which is good, but like there was a lot of reviews of people being like, why can't I remove ads? There's too many ads in this game. And there was clearly people who probably would have been okay with paying for it. And yeah, compare that to Corporate Salmon, where with that I had a notification every time an ad closed, which would pop up and say, hey, do you want to remove ads? And with that, in comparison, that got, I think it was like 2,400.
Wow, that's a big jump.
Which was a huge difference. Yeah, like so rather than burying it in the settings, like having it explicitly there, I think that made a huge difference. And I kind of feel, bad that I didn't have. And the other huge mistake that I made with Narcissus is that the huge mistake that I made with Narcissus was that I basically. Sorry, this is throwing me off. Huge mistake that I made with Narcissus. Oh god.
That's alright. Take your time.
Let me think. Huge mistake.
It was in line with the burying the.
It was burying the settings.
Settings and cancel that.
Oh no. That was it. So basically, like in Corporate Salmon, the way it works is that you have the pop-up, and that you have a game over screen, which is like explicit. You've lost, and then you click restart. With Narcissus, in the ad-free version, it actually works really nicely, and it actually feels quite refreshing. Basically, when you die, you immediately go straight back into gameplay.
Oh, I see. So technically, you don't have an option to, opt to cancelling the ad in the minigame.
So the game technically pauses, but basically the moment you close the ad, you're immediately back into the game. So there's no like menu where it's like game over.
You don't see that menu screen.
Yeah, so it basically went straight back into gameplay. So what happened was people would close ads and then immediately like die twice. And there were like 2 out of 5 deaths on their way to seeing an ad again. And then, like that is something I'm planning, because I'm planning an update for Narcissus finally after like ages. That was another mistake potentially, is I haven't updated any of my games since releasing them.
By the way, how compared to like PC gaming, how is it important to update your game on mobile?
I mean, I don't know how much experience I can give with like in comparison to, because I haven't updated my games, but from the other developers that I know that have updated games, Apple does offer refeatures for like the best updated game, or best updated games, plural. So yeah, there are, going back to what we were talking about before, there are refeatures available, and releasing more content makes that more likely. So yeah, it is a big thing if you can, put the
keep updating. Yeah.
With Corporate Salmon, I probably should have released more content for it. It is one of those things that I will get back to. But with Narcissus, I was just exhausted. Like after 5 years of working on it, I was just like, I never want to see this project again. After probably a year and a bit, I'm now at a point where I'm like, I can probably work on this project again. And once again, getting it on Steam is like one of the kind of things I want to do next. I'm still not sure about Android. I've heard very mixed things about releasing.
Why are you so hesitant about Android?
So it's the lack of standardization of devices. So there's a lot of the friends who have released on Android have like received like deluges of like complaints of people being like, it doesn't work on my device, and you ask for specs and it turns out to be a square phone from like the 90s. So I don't know. It's just like there's that. There's the fact that with ads, you actually get quite low revenue from even high numbers of people, and it depends on the region as well. And then on top of that, you've got there's like the subtle stuff as well, like the fact that if you want to have in-app purchases, you have to publish an address, like a business address, which is
a physical address.
Yeah. So if you're an indie, like that might be your home address, and like, do you really want your home address putting on the internet linked to a game that, if it turns out to be successful, could be like, like it's just stuff like that, and like
too much exposure.
Yeah, and I probably will get around to doing it at some point, but it's the question of like, in the time it takes me to optimize this and release this for Android, could I have released another title, or could I focus on releasing more content if the title exists, or could I have released it on platforms like Steam that could potentially give a better return. So yeah, that's kind of why I haven't gone for Android yet, and I haven't seen from a friend of mine. He got, I think it was, in terms of numbers, he got, I think it was $0 from Amazon. I think it was $400 from Android for his game, and then $40K from iOS.
And it's ad revenue.
Yeah, so it's like that's a huge difference. Yeah, and I've heard this kind of played out with other developers as well. Not those exact numbers, but in terms of ratios.
Okay, so we live in the UK. How hard is it to be an indie developer in the UK?
So Cambridge specifically, it's like as an indie, it's kind of, it works quite nicely. It's essentially a nomad role, a digital nomad role where you can, you can basically work from wherever as long as you've got an internet connection. In terms of like support, having these communities available. Particularly when I previously was in Yorkshire, and up there they had like such kind of a tight knit, kind of thriving community up there, where basically you had like. You'd had these meetups where in all of the different towns, and then you had like a big like regional meetup where you'd get like 200, 300 developers meeting up for an evening. So yeah, in terms of support, there's it's really, really good. In terms of cost, as I said, Cambridge is quite expensive, but I obviously can work from home, so that makes things a little bit easier, and then tax things on the other end. But in terms of the UK itself, the problem is, as well, as I've got nothing to compare it against. Obviously medical expenses are covered, so like
you don't have that American
but I've seen like situations
yeah.
where I've spoken to Americans and just but yeah, like in terms of the UK, it's pretty good. Obviously, like the north is cheaper, and I occasionally pine to return to the hills of the north, but once again, it's a trade-off because like in Cambridge, you've got a lot more kind of and the south, you've got a lot more studios and kind of a lot more opportunities for stuff. So
and it's better kind of connected to London. It's
yeah,
like for
exactly.
people who don't know how far London from Cambridge or Cambridge from London, it's like 40 minutes by train.
But it's once again, it's that trade-off of like, once again, for me, like I don't necessarily need to be anywhere near London because I can work from anywhere.
No,
so
yeah.
like, for me, it's more the reason to be in Cambridge is more to do with my partner. But in general, being in India in the UK is okay.
What are the disadvantages and advantages of working alone?
So there's quite a few. So in terms of working alone, the pros is obviously you get to work on your own project. You have an agency. You don't have to pay anyone, which is great. I mean, I do pay to get my music produced, but outside of that, I do everything myself. The disadvantages is motivation. So like even just working with someone else, I've done client work before where I've worked actively with other developers. So like, I've been a programmer on projects before. And having that back and forth and kind of like, seeing, it was working with someone in Canada with the last one I worked on. And that was like going to bed, having worked all day on something and then coming back and waking up and being like, oh wow, this person's made this in the time that I've been asleep. And then powering through with work for that period of time, sending them the work and kind of having this like feedback loop. Like also knowing that individual is like relying on you for food and like that not I mean
I got it.
Financially, like you're dependent on one another, like that is a powerful thing. It means that you kind of are more willing to stick to deadlines, and it's hard to justify pushing stuff back. And then once again, and this is a big one, I think this is massively underestimated in terms of the effect it has on industry. It's quite lonely, when you're working independently and you're kind of on your own, compared to someone who works in like a big studio or even just someone in the non-gaming industry world. You work in an office space and you have colleagues and you have people that you interact with on a daily basis.
You see people.
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge thing. Like it's kind of underestimated that like there is so many. There's interactions on Twitter, and I have a Skype group that I kind of on a daily basis talk to about projects, and we kind of liaise. But like, you're in that space on your bill, and like, I think it's something that you really have to kind of keep on top of, in doing social stuff. And then from what I've heard from other developers as well, and this isn't to say that working with other people is good as well, because you can also, if you're working together in isolation, you can also go insane and kill each other. So not necessarily working with people fixes that, more maintaining social interactions is good.
We are just about an hour, I think. I've got still a few questions.
I'm fine.
We can just make them really, really fast and
that's fine. I'm very flexible.
So Apple closes its affiliate program. What means for those who don't know, basically Apple used to give some portion of revenue from app sales to websites who would give like reviews, ratings, all that stuff, which weren't part of the like Apple company itself. And now they decided to cut it down. What means that many websites, which used to cover all the gaming websites, apps, and all that stuff, will shut down pretty much soon. How will it affect indie developers and developers in general, in your opinion?
So for me, once again, going back to what we were discussing before, realistically, the big thing that makes a huge difference is whether you get the feature. But I should emphasize that, like, in getting that first feature, like, having a backlog of, like, reviews and coverage from various websites saying that this is something worth paying attention to, when I approached Apple, I think puts you in a much better position than if you were just some rando sending them your game without any kind of, like, backup from, like, other outlets. I think it's genuinely a shame that they've decided to cut this, because once again, like, it's more revenue going to Apple, which I don't mind. It's more that, like, if you can support more jobs and kind of more, like, when I look at something like Touch Arcade, for example, that's a website I've been kind of, like, following for a number of years and posting my content on there. For them, they could be, for what is a pretty minor amount of money for Apple, helps the whole community of journalists and gamers thrive. I think it's a shame, but, like, I'll be interested to see what Apple replaces it with. Let's have to see.
Yeah, we'll see. Do you have any new games in development? I mean, you've said, but can you? I know, but
so the game that I've decided to kind of follow up Corporate Salmon with was, so one of the mistakes that I kind of have is, as well, I have a tendency of, like, choosing projects and then just drifting, like, between several different projects. So I think there's about 3 or 4 projects that I currently have that I could finish and release, but, like, I tend to kind of alternate between them. But the one I focused on at the moment, which is nearest to release, is one called Shump, which is it's like a mix of a shoot 'em up with a platformer. So you have your character that kind of climbs vertically, and kind of automatically shoots out the top of the head, and you've basically just got to kill everything in your path going up, and killing a bunch of bosses and stuff like that.
When's going to be done?
So I'm aiming to, and this is going back to what we were talking about earlier. I'm aiming to finish it by the end of this month, because, like,
very soon.
Money's ticking down, but then I've got to submit it to Apple, which takes 6 to 8 weeks. So probably looking at an October release, preferably before Halloween, because, once again, like, all those features are going to get, like, eaten up by, like, pumpkin games and, like, mobile stuff. So I don't know. Timing your app release is terrifying. I know.
Is there any, like, for example, in like a PC market, there are, like,
hotspots?
Yeah, time frames where, well, at least there used to be some. Like, for example, for Indies, there, like, autumn is a big release window for AAAs, and like, before Christmas time. And another one was somewhere in spring.
Yeah.
So for Indies, it was kind of safe to release somewhere between those two windows. Is there anything like that in mobile?
So I those sales windows that exist, I've technically ignored. So, like, Christmas is obviously, like, a very dangerous time. It's less. It depends on the scale of your studio. So, once again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, like, as an indie developer, like, you're competing with, like, huge studios. Like, when I released Corporate Salmon, on the roster with the games that I'd released with, there was FIFA. So, like, you're in particular, the date that I chose to release could have been, like, a career-ending mistake. Because I basically chose the week before Thanksgiving, and I thought that was the right time to release, because I was like, oh, I'll be out of the way before the Thanksgiving, which is definitely going to be booked up.
Yeah.
I'll be out of the way by then. But what I realised was I booked the week that everyone wanted, because what it is that the week that connects to it, the Apple employees are off work for Thanksgiving.
Oh, really?
So that I picked ended on Thanksgiving, which was the date that everyone wanted. so yeah, like I had this like horrifying realization where I'm like, oh my god, am I going to get featured? Because like but I did. So that was it went from like what could have potentially.
You got lucky.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is so much of it is luck, and I think it's something that a lot of people don't talk about. Is like there's a lot of like big talks that happen in industry, and it's like making sure that you acknowledge how many variables had to slide into place in the exact right way for the projects to work out. As I said before, take everything with a pinch of salt.
And before we wrap up, I've got another question, which we've been talking about the mobile gaming and all this stuff, but I know you work on something that not everyone like does or even understand or know that it exists. Like you work on different controllers,
yes.
Like weird controllers, game controls, like controllers that are games in themselves, like vaccination, for example. Yep. Can you talk about it and like why do you do it, and is it a market for such things?
So so the stuff that I do is basically like kind of unusual kind of ones, like arcade interfaces. So this is stuff like I don't know if I've gone that far, but like as when you go to like an arcade and you've got like your giant like alien gun that you're firing, or your steering wheel for your driving games or your dance stunt. Like, so I build interfaces like that. And yeah, like as part of that, there's a couple of big benefits to doing that. So for one, there's getting exhibiting space. So it's there's a lot of conferences that are much more receptive to you submitting a custom controller and an exciting interface than just a mouse and keyboard. Like when you go to all of these big expos, everyone has a mouse and keyboard, and it's really boring. Having a controller in that format draws the audiences in. On top of that, there are kind of venues and kind of pubs and things like that are looking for these kinds of interfaces and setups that are willing to pay money. Another one is museums. If you can design, installations. I mean, once again, you don't necessarily have to make anything particularly complex for a museum, but having like an interactive installation in a museum, there's so much money on the table. And the bottom line is there's a lot of the companies that cater to those markets aren't games developers. They're like tech companies that are like, we can make money in this field. Compared to people who know, games developers who've spent their lives building, interactive experiences. So like it seems like a really nice, like kind of, it's a niche market, admittedly, but even if you get like a coin op with like a museum and then just have like a rev share, like that, every 30% of every pound that goes in, you take a slice. Like that's a nice little thing, and that literally, as long as you keep it running, is indefinite. As long as the museum's open, that money's going to be coming in. And
that's cool. It's really very uncommon. I mean, I've never heard about it before I met you, so it's like for me it was.
It's. I think it's still like very kind of. It's very, very niche, but like it's just finding ways to kind of find money in the gaming market. And once again, I should emphasize that this is a kind of a side venture for me and my partner who are kind of working on this stuff. But like, it's like over the last few years, we've made decent money from like running workshops and producing kind of installations. She at the moment is working with the V&A and producing some arcade cabinets for them. So there's definitely interest for it and money available.
That's cool. Thanks for coming. I think we've covered everything, at least from my point of view. We got 2 people watching us, so I don't know if there are going to be any questions for Alex. If you got questions, you can ask them in Russian and I'll translate them to Alex. So we'll keep
Thank you for listening, by the way.
We keep talking some random shit for like a couple of minutes, and if there won't be any questions, we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, that's fine. Were there any other questions in your, like that you?
No, they're just random stuff.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
So nothing that I don't know. I'll like just random stuff, to be honest. So yeah, what? You said that up north it's a big community. To be honest, like I'm not doubting that, but I've never. Maybe it's just my mistake, but I've never seen a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah,
up north, and not many prominent developers from there. I mean, well-known developers.
Yeah, so it's once again, it's the same thing as what we were discussing before, which is that like we exist in this kind of digital space where like we don't actually know where like these studios could exist anywhere.
Yeah.
These that they're exporting from. So for example, Team 17, the ones who make Worms, are based in Wakefield.
Which is like,
it's just this kind of in a small industrial town. And like you'd think that for the prestige they'd be in somewhere like in London or whatever, but they're in this big studio supporting local trade. The big thing that kind of it's organized, kind of the organizing body of the region is this thing called Gameo, which is this Game Makers Yorkshire. They all organise all sorts of events, and there's another game based in Sheffield, Gang Beasts. The developers behind that, they're based in Sheffield. They're just kind of like dotted all over the region, I think it's almost kind of one of those situations that because of the success of the South, there's this kind of like. This incentive for kind of like let's really like that kind of brings people together more to kind of make a success of the North, I think that's kind of come to fruition with the number of developers that are now supporting one another. In particular, like being able to approach other developers and kind of lift each other up. I think that there is like a real kind of a really strong community there.
Cool. So we don't have any questions. So,
that's fine.
I think we scared off a lot of our listeners.
That's fine. Don't worry about it.
It's all right. I'll post the video tomorrow. So,
and if anyone has any other questions, feel free to get in touch on Twitter. My messages are open.
Yeah, I'll post all the links along with the video. So thanks for coming, Alex.
Yeah, no problem. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming to the stream, and bye bye.
Cool. Thanks.